Inside Calvetti Tower, fear lived in the walls. Men with blood-stained knuckles stepped through private elevators. Politicians smiled over hidden bribes. Executives whispered Dante Calvetti's name like a prayer they were terrified to say too loudly. And in the middle of that dangerous empire sat Oilia Thorne, the quiet, painfully shy secretary who barely looked anyone in the eye. She spoke softly, walked carefully, apologized too much. Most people overlooked her completely. But every afternoon at exactly 3:17 p.m., Oilia packed her things, lowered her head, and left the building without explanation. The only person in Dante Calvetti's entire organization who seemed untouchable by his questions. The mysterious routine slowly consumed him. Because Dante Calvetti noticed everything, and shy girls with secrets were the most dangerous mysteries of all. If you want to see how this story unfolds, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. The elevator smelled like expensive cologne and quiet violence. Oilia Thorne pressed herself against the brass railing, clutching a stack of manila folders against her chest like armor. 3 men in dark suits stood near the front, their voices low and clipped as they discussed something she didn't want to hear. Numbers. Shipments. A name that made her stomach twist. She kept her eyes down. Always down. The elevator climbed toward the 40th floor, and Oilia counted each passing number in her head to keep from shaking. 36, 37, 38. The men didn't even glance at her. She had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. Shoulders hunched, voice soft, movements careful and unobtrusive. The doors opened with a soft chime. Oilia slipped out before anyone else moved, her heels clicking quietly against polished marble as she hurried down the hallway toward her desk. The reception area outside Dante Calvetti's office was all glass and cold steel, designed to make visitors feel exposed, vulnerable. She hated it, but she needed this job more than she hated anything. Oilia set the folders on her desk and sank into her chair, exhaling slowly. Her hands were trembling. They always trembled in the mornings right before Dante arrived. She didn't know why. He had never raised his voice at her, never threatened her, never even looked at her the way some of the other men in this building did. But Dante Calvetti didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone was suffocating. The door to his private office stood slightly ajar, revealing dark wood paneling and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Oilia had been inside exactly twice in 6 months, both times to deliver documents he needed signed immediately. Both times she had placed the papers on his desk without looking up, mumbled something incoherent, and fled before he could say anything beyond thank you. She was a coward. She knew it, but survival required cowardice sometimes. Her phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. "We're out of milk again." Oilia closed her eyes and pressed her palm against her forehead. Milk. She needed to pick up milk and bread, and somehow find $20 she didn't have to cover Marcus's asthma medication because the prescription had run out 3 days early and the pharmacist wouldn't refill it without payment up front. $20. It might as well have been $2,000. She deleted the text and opened her email, forcing herself to focus on work. Meetings to schedule, calls to return, invoices to process. The monotonous rhythm of her job was the only thing keeping her sane right now. At 9:47 a.m., the elevator chimed again. Oilia's spine straightened automatically. Dante Calvetti stepped into the reception area like a storm rolling in off Lake Michigan, all controlled power and quiet menace. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it looked like it had been stitched directly onto his body. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been handsome if it wasn't so unsettlingly cold. Storm gray eyes that missed nothing. He didn't acknowledge her. He never did. Dante walked past her desk without a word, his polished shoes making no sound against the marble, and disappeared into his office. The door clicked shut behind him. Oilia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This was normal, safe, predictable. She turned back to her computer and started typing an email to a client in New York, her fingers moving automatically across the keyboard. But halfway through the third sentence, she felt it. That prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. Oilia glanced up. Dante stood in the doorway of his office, one hand resting against the frame, his gray eyes fixed directly on her. Her heart stuttered. "Miss Thorne." His voice was low, quiet, the kind of quiet that made people lean in to hear better, and regret it immediately. Yes, sir?" Oilia hated how small her voice sounded, how weak. Dante tilted his head slightly, studying her with the kind of intensity that made her want to crawl under her desk and hide. "You leave every day at 3:17, he said. It wasn't a question. Oilia's mouth went dry. Yes, I have permission from HR to... I didn't ask if you had permission." She froze. Dante took a step closer, his hands sliding into his pockets. He moved like a predator. Slow, deliberate, impossibly controlled. "I asked why 3:17. Not 3 o'clock, not 3:30. Exactly 3:17, every single day for 6 months. Oilia's pulse hammered in her throat. She couldn't tell him the truth. Couldn't explain that 16 years ago, at exactly 3:17 p.m., a woman named Ruth had found her half frozen on a street corner and saved her life. Couldn't explain that every day since then, she honored that moment by leaving work at the exact time Ruth had pulled her out of the snow. Couldn't explain that 3:17 was also the only time she could make it to the south side before the soup kitchen closed, where she picked up donated food to bring to the 6 children hiding in a basement beneath a condemned building in Russian-controlled territory. She couldn't explain any of it, so she lied. I have a second job," Oilia whispered. Dante's expression didn't change. "Doing what?" "Cleaning offices." "Which offices?" Her mind went blank. I don't remember the name of the company." Dante's eyes narrowed slightly. "You don't remember the name of the company you work for every single day?" Oilia wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the floor and never exist again. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "I didn't mean... Stop apologizing." She flinched. Dante stepped even closer until he was standing directly in front of her desk. This close, she could see the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, could smell the faint scent of cedar and smoke clinging to his suit. "Look at me." Oilia forced herself to lift her gaze. Meeting Dante Calvetti's eyes felt like staring into a frozen lake, beautiful and terrifying and completely unreadable. "You're lying," he said softly. It wasn't an accusation, it was a fact. Oilia's throat closed up. Dante studied her for another long moment, then straightened and turned back toward his office. "Don't lie to me again, Miss Thorne." The door clicked shut. Oilia sat frozen at her desk, her entire body trembling. He knew. He didn't know what she was hiding, but he knew she was hiding something, and Dante Calvetti didn't tolerate secrets in his organization. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of anxiety. Oilia answered phones with shaking hands and scheduled meetings she immediately forgot about. Every time Dante's door opened, her heart lurched. But he didn't speak to her again, didn't even look at her. Somehow, that was worse. At 12:30 p.m., she grabbed her purse and took the elevator down to the lobby, desperately needing air. The moment she stepped outside, Chicago's November wind hit her like a slap. She pulled her thin coat tighter and walked 2 blocks to a corner deli where she bought a small cup of coffee she couldn't afford and a day-old bagel she planned to save for later. Her phone buzzed again. "Lila has a fever." Oilia's stomach dropped. She typed back quickly. "How high?" The response came within seconds. 101.3. "She's asking for you." Oilia closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against the cold deli window. Lila was 7 years old, the youngest of the 6 kids. She had been living in the basement shelter for almost 2 years now, ever since her mother overdosed in an alley 3 blocks away and social services never came looking. Lila was small and fragile and terrified of everything. And she was sick. Oilia typed back, "I'll be there as soon as I can. Give her the children's Tylenol in the red bottle." She shoved her phone back into her pocket and took a long sip of coffee, even though it burned her tongue. She didn't have time to be careful. Didn't have time to sit here feeling sorry for herself. She had 6 kids depending on her. 6 kids who would starve if she lost this job. Oilia finished her coffee, wrapped the bagel in a napkin, and walked back to Calvetti Tower. The afternoon dragged. Oilia kept glancing at the clock on her computer screen, watching the minutes crawl toward 3:17. Dante remained locked in his office for most of the day, taking calls and meeting with men in expensive suits who looked like they ate smaller criminals for breakfast. At 3:10, Oilia started packing her things. She moved quietly, efficiently, slipping her purse over her shoulder and shutting down her computer. 7 minutes. Just 7 more minutes, and she could leave. At 3:14, Dante's door opened. Oilia's hands froze on her keyboard. He walked out carrying a leather briefcase, his expression unreadable as always. But instead of heading toward the elevator, he stopped beside her desk. "Going somewhere, Miss Thorne?" Her pulse spiked. Yes. It's almost 3:17. "I'm aware." Dante set his briefcase down on the edge of her desk and leaned against it, folding his arms across his chest. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and the way he loomed over her made Oilia feel like a mouse trapped beneath a hawk's shadow. "I need you to stay late tonight," he said. Oilia's heart stopped. I can't." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Dante's eyes darkened. "Excuse me? I'm sorry," Oilia stammered, panic rising in her chest. I have to leave at 3:17. I can come back later. I can stay as late as you need after 6, but I have to leave now. Please." She hated how desperate she sounded, hated how weak. Dante didn't move, didn't blink. "What's so important that you can't stay 20 minutes late?" Oilia's mind raced. She couldn't tell him about the kids. Couldn't risk anyone finding out about the basement shelter. If Child Services discovered 6 unregistered minors living in condemned territory, they would be split up and sent to different foster homes within hours. And Oilia knew what happened to kids in the system. She had lived it. I can't," she whispered. Dante studied her for a long, silent moment. Then he picked up his briefcase and stepped back. "Go." Oilia blinked. "What?" "I said go, Miss Thorne." She didn't wait for him to change his mind. Oilia grabbed her purse and practically ran toward the elevator, her heels clicking frantically against the marble. She could feel Dante's gaze burning into her back the entire way. The elevator doors closed, and Oilia finally let herself breathe. The south side of Chicago looked like a war zone, boarded-up buildings, graffiti-covered walls, broken streetlights that hadn't worked in years. Oilia walked quickly, keeping her head down and her purse clutched tightly against her side. This neighborhood belonged to the Bratva, the Russian mob, and even though she wasn't involved in their business, being seen here was dangerous, especially for someone who worked for Dante Calvetti. She turned down an alley behind an abandoned warehouse and stopped in front of a rusted metal door, half hidden beneath a fire escape. Oilia knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. The door creaked open. A teenage boy with sharp brown eyes and a suspicious expression peered out at her. "You're late," Marcus said. "I know. I'm sorry." Oilia slipped inside and Marcus locked the door behind her. The basement was cold and dark, lit only by a few battery-powered lanterns scattered across the concrete floor. Makeshift beds lined the walls, old mattresses covered with donated blankets and pillows that had seen better days. 5 children looked up as Oilia entered. Marcus, 17, stood near the door with his arms crossed, tall and wiry, with a permanent scowl and a knife hidden in his boot. Sienna, 14, sat cross-legged on her mattress, reading a battered paperback by lantern light. She didn't look up. The twins, Jonah and Alara, both 11, were huddled together near the back wall, playing cards with a deck missing half its face cards. And Lila, 7 years old, lay curled up on her bed with a blanket pulled up to her chin. Oilia crossed the room and knelt beside her. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing damp hair away from Lila's flushed face. "How are you feeling?" Lila's fever-bright eyes blinked open. "You came." "Of course I came." Oilia pressed the back of her hand against Lila's forehead, still warm but not as hot as before. The Tylenol must have kicked in. "Did you eat anything today?" Oilia asked softly. Lila shook her head. Oilia's chest tightened. She reached into her purse and pulled out the day-old bagel she had saved from lunch, tearing it into small pieces. "Here, just a little bit, okay?" Lila took a tiny bite, chewing slowly. Behind her, Marcus cleared his throat. "We're out of food again," he said bluntly, "and the water heater's broken. Again." Oilia closed her eyes. I'll figure it out. How? Marcus's voice was sharp, accusing. You're already working yourself to death, Oilia. When are you going to admit this isn't sustainable? It's sustainable as long as I'm still breathing. That's not an answer. Oilia stood and turned to face him. Marcus was almost as tall as she was now, and the anger in his eyes reminded her too much of the scared 10-year-old boy Ruth had pulled out of a drug house 7 years ago. What do you want me to say, Marcus? Oilia asked quietly. That I don't know how we're going to make it through next month, that I'm terrified every single day that someone's going to find you, that I go to bed every night wondering if I'm doing enough? Her voice cracked. I know this isn't sustainable, but it's all I have. Marcus's expression softened slightly. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, he muttered. I don't want you to kill yourself trying to save us. Oilia reached out and squeezed his shoulder. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, any of you. It was a promise she had no idea how to keep. Oilia stayed until almost 8 p.m., making sure Lila's fever stayed down, and the other kids had eaten the meager dinner she had managed to scrape together from donated canned goods. By the time she left the basement and emerged back into the freezing November night, exhaustion had seeped into her bones. The train ride back to her apartment took 40 minutes. She lived in a studio on the north side, a cramped, depressing space with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that only worked half the time. But it was cheap, and it was hers, and she could afford it as long as she didn't eat more than one meal a day. Oilia unlocked the door and stepped inside, dropping her purse on the floor. Her stomach growled. She ignored it. Instead, she walked to the tiny kitchen and opened the cabinet above the sink, pulling out a jar where she kept her emergency cash. $17.32. Not enough for Marcus's medication, not even close. Oilia sank onto the edge of her bed and buried her face in her hands. She was so tired, so impossibly tired, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep doing this. The next morning, Oilia arrived at Calvetti Tower at 8:45 a.m., her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Dante was already in his office. She could see him through the glass walls, sitting behind his desk with his phone pressed to his ear. He looked calm, composed, completely in control. Oilia envied him. She sat down at her desk and started going through emails, forcing herself to focus. But halfway through responding to a client inquiry, she noticed something strange. A small white envelope sitting on the corner of her desk. Oilia frowned. She didn't remember seeing it yesterday. She picked it up carefully and opened it. Inside was $500 in cash. No note, no explanation. Just 5 crisp $100 bills. Oilia's hands started shaking. She looked up sharply, her gaze flying to Dante's office. He was still on the phone, his back turned to her. But somehow she knew. He had left this. And that terrified her more than anything else. Because Dante Calvetti didn't do kindness. He did control. And now he had just bought a piece of her. Oilia stared at the $500 like it might bite her. Her fingers trembled against the crisp bills, and her stomach twisted into knots so tight she thought she might be sick right there at her desk. She knew what this was, knew exactly what it meant. Dante Calvetti didn't give gifts, he made investments, and now she owed him. Oilia shoved the money back into the envelope and stood up so quickly her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Through the glass, she could see Dante still on his phone, his profile sharp and unreadable against the gray Chicago skyline. She needed to give it back, right now, before this became something she couldn't escape. Oilia crossed the reception area on shaking legs and knocked softly on Dante's office door. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her, just held up one finger in a gesture that clearly meant wait. She waited. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she could hear it in her ears. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her hand. Finally, Dante ended the call and turned to face her. Miss Thorne. His voice was calm, measured, like he hadn't just left her enough money to cover 3 months of rent. Oilia held out the envelope with both hands, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't accept this. Dante glanced at the envelope, then back at her face. Why not? Because I didn't earn it. I disagree. Oilia blinked. I don't understand. Dante leaned back against his desk, folding his arms across his chest. He was wearing another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal gray with a black tie. and the way he watched her made Oilia feel like a specimen under a microscope. "You've worked for me for 6 months without missing a single day," Dante said. "You arrive early. Stay late when I need you. Handle confidential information without asking questions. That kind of loyalty is worth more than your salary." "This isn't loyalty," Oilia said quietly. I don't know what this is." "It's a bonus." "I don't want a bonus." Dante's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you want, Miss Thorne?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Oilia wanted so many things she couldn't have. Wanted the kids to be safe. Wanted to stop living on the edge of collapse every single day. Wanted to sleep through the night without nightmares about social services tearing her fragile family apart. But she couldn't say any of that. So instead she said, "I just want to do my job." Dante studied her for a long moment. Then he pushed off the desk and took a step closer. Oilia's breath caught. "Take the money," Dante said softly. "Buy yourself a decent coat. You're going to freeze to death in that thing you're wearing." He nodded toward her thin jacket draped over the chair outside. Oilia's cheeks flushed. "My coat is fine. It's November in Chicago, and you're walking around in something that wouldn't keep a child warm." "I said I'm fine." "You're lying again." The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they hit like a slap. Oilia's hands clenched around the envelope. "Why do you care?" "I don't." It should have stung. It didn't, because Oilia could see the lie in his eyes. Dante Calvetti cared about something, and that terrified her more than his indifference ever could. "Keep the money," Dante said, turning back toward his desk. "Or don't. But if I see you shivering at your desk one more time, I'm buying you a coat myself." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Oilia stood frozen in the doorway, the envelope burning in her hands. Then she turned and walked back to her desk without another word. She didn't spend the money. Not that day. Not the next. Oilia tucked the envelope into the bottom of her purse and tried to pretend it didn't exist. But every time she reached for her wallet or her phone, her fingers brushed against it, and guilt twisted through her chest like a knife. The money could buy Marcus's medication, could fix the broken water heater in the basement, could put real food on the table instead of donated cans of soup and stale bread. But taking it felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. By Thursday afternoon, Oilia's resolve was crumbling. Lila's fever had come back. Marcus was coughing so hard at night he couldn't sleep, and the landlord of the condemned building had started sniffing around, asking questions about noise coming from the basement. Oilia was drowning, and Dante Calvetti had thrown her a rope she was too terrified to grab. At 2:45 p.m., she was filing paperwork when Dante's office door opened. He stepped out carrying his briefcase, his expression unreadable as always. "I have a meeting downtown," he said. "I'll be back by 5. Oilia nodded. "Yes, sir." Dante paused. Then he walked over to her desk and set a business card down in front of her. Oilia glanced at it. Dr. Sarah Chen, pediatrician, Lincoln Park. Her blood went cold. "There's a kid in your life who needs medical attention," Dante said quietly. "This doctor doesn't ask questions, and she owes me a favor." Oilia's throat closed up. "I don't—" "Stop lying to me, Miss Thorne." Dante's voice was still calm, still controlled, but there was steel beneath it now. "I don't know what you're hiding," he continued, "and I don't care. But if a child is involved, you're going to get them help. Understand?" Oilia couldn't breathe, couldn't think. How did he know? Dante leaned down slightly, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "Take the card. Make the appointment. Or I will." Then he straightened and walked toward the elevator without looking back. The doors closed, and Oilia sat at her desk, staring at the business card like it was a loaded gun. That night, Oilia brought Lila to Dr. Chen's office. The clinic was small and private, tucked into a quiet street in Lincoln Park, where the buildings were clean and the streetlights actually worked. Oilia held Lila's small hand as they walked inside, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Dr. Chen was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and steady hands. She examined Lila without asking a single question about insurance or guardianship, or why a 26-year-old secretary was bringing a 7-year-old to the doctor at 7 p.m. on a Thursday. "Respiratory infection," Dr. Chen said after the exam. Nothing serious, but she needs antibiotics. I'll write you a prescription. Oilia's hands shook as she took the paper. How much? It's covered. Oilia blinked. What? Dr. Chen smiled gently. Mr. Calvetti took care of it. The words hit Oilia like a punch to the stomach. She managed to mumble a thank you and get Lila out of the office before the tears started. They made it halfway down the block before Oilia had to stop and lean against a brick wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Lila tugged on her sleeve. Oilia, are you okay? No, she wasn't okay. Because Dante Calvetti had just saved Lila's life, and Oilia didn't know what that cost. Bossy nasum butsy tea. The next morning, Oilia arrived at work 30 minutes early. She needed to talk to Dante, needed to understand what he wanted from her, because men like him didn't do favors without expecting something in return. But when she stepped off the elevator, the reception area was empty. Dante's office door was closed. Oilia set her purse down and started making coffee, her movements automatic and mechanical. She was pouring her second cup when the elevator chimed again. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, expensive suit, cold blue eyes. Oilia recognized him immediately. Alexei Volkov, head of the Bratva's Chicago operations, and the most dangerous man on the South Side. Volkov's gaze swept over her like she was furniture, then dismissed her just as quickly. He walked past her desk without a word and knocked once on Dante's office door before stepping inside. Oilia's hands trembled around her coffee mug. What was Volkov doing here? The Bratva and Calvetti's organization had been at war for over a decade. Territorial disputes, revenue conflicts, bodies turning up in alleys with bullets in the back of their heads. And now Volkov was standing in Dante's office like they were business partners. Oilia forced herself to sit down and focus on her computer screen, but her heart was racing and every instinct she had was screaming at her to run. 15 minutes later, the office door opened. Volkov stepped out first, his expression unreadable. Dante followed, his jaw tight, and his eyes darker than Oilia had ever seen them. We'll be in touch, Volkov said. Dante didn't respond. Volkov smiled, a cold, empty expression that didn't reach his eyes, and walked toward the elevator. But before he stepped inside, he paused and glanced back at Oilia. You work on the South Side, don't you? Oilia's blood turned to ice. No, I don't. I've seen you. Volkov's smile widened. Walking through my streets every evening like clockwork. Oilia couldn't speak, couldn't move. Dante's voice cut through the air like a blade. That's enough, Alexei. Volkov chuckled softly. Just making conversation. The elevator doors closed, and Oilia sat frozen at her desk, her entire body shaking. Dante walked over slowly and stopped in front of her. Look at me. Oilia forced her gaze up. Dante's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were burning with something she couldn't name. Why are you walking through Bratva territory every night? He asked quietly. Oilia's throat closed up. I told you I have a second job. And I told you to stop lying. I'm not Oilia. Her name. He had never said her name before, and the way it sounded in his voice, low and rough and almost gentle, made her chest tighten. Please, Oilia whispered. Please don't ask me this. Dante crouched down in front of her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. The movement was so unexpected that Oilia's breath caught. Whatever you're doing, Dante said softly, it's going to get you killed. Volkov doesn't make idle threats. If he's noticed you, that means you're on his radar, and that means you're in danger. Oilia's eyes burned. I don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Not me. The words came out harsher than she intended. Dante's jaw tightened. Why not? Because 6 kids were depending on her. Because the moment she stopped showing up, they would starve. Because she had made a promise to Ruth before she died. And Oilia would rather die herself than break it. But she couldn't say any of that. So instead, she stood up abruptly, forcing Dante to step back. I need to get back to work, Oilia said, her voice shaking. Dante didn't move. This conversation isn't over. Yes, it is. She turned away before he could see the tears starting to fall. But this... The rest of the day was unbearable. Oilia could feel Dante's gaze on her every time she moved, could sense him watching her through the glass walls of his office, could feel the weight of his suspicion pressing down on her like a physical thing. At 3:10 p.m., she started packing her things. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely zip her purse. At 3:15, Dante's office door opened. Oilia didn't look up. She heard his footsteps crossing the marble, heard him stop beside her desk. "I'm coming with you." Oilia's head snapped up. "What?" Dante stood there with his coat already on, his expression carved from stone. "Whatever you're doing at 3:17 every day," he said, "I'm coming with you." Panic flooded Oilia's chest. "No, you can't. I wasn't asking permission. Dante, please." "Either I follow you," Dante said calmly, "or I have one of my men follow you. Your choice." Oilia stared at him, her mind racing. If Dante followed her to the basement, he would see the kids, would see the condemned building, would see everything she had been hiding for 2 years. And then what? Would he report her to child services? Would he use the information against her? Would he... Oilia. She blinked. Dante was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, "or whatever you're protecting." "How do you know I'm protecting something?" "Because you look terrified. And the only time people look that terrified is when they're protecting something they love more than their own life." The words hit her like a freight train. Oilia's vision blurred. "If I show you," she whispered, "you have to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you won't take them away." Dante's expression shifted. "Them?" Oilia's hands clenched into fists. She was about to destroy everything, but she didn't have a choice anymore. "Promise me," she said again, her voice breaking. Dante held her gaze for a long moment, then he nodded once. "I promise." Oilia didn't know if she believed him, but she was out of options. Well, the train ride to the south side was silent. Oilia sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring out the window at the city blurring past. Dante sat beside her, his presence overwhelming even in the crowded train car. She could feel people staring at them, could feel the weight of curious eyes wondering what a man in a $3,000 suit was doing on a southbound train in the middle of the afternoon. When they finally reached their stop, Oilia stood without a word and walked toward the exit. Dante followed. The south side looked even worse in daylight. Graffiti covered every available surface. Broken glass littered the sidewalks. A group of men smoking cigarettes outside a corner store watched them pass with hard, suspicious eyes. Oilia kept her head down and walked faster. Dante stayed close beside her, his hand resting inside his coat pocket where she knew he kept a gun. They turned down the alley behind the abandoned warehouse. Oilia stopped in front of the rusted metal door. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might explode. She glanced back at Dante. He was watching her with those unreadable gray eyes, waiting. Oilia knocked 3 times, paused, knocked twice more. The door creaked open. Marcus stood in the doorway, his eyes widening when he saw Dante. "What the hell?" "It's okay," Oilia said quickly. He's with me." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Oilia's expression must have stopped him, because he stepped back and let them inside. The basement was cold and dark, just like always. But this time, Oilia was seeing it through Dante's eyes. The makeshift beds, the battery-powered lanterns, the cracked concrete walls, the donated blankets that barely kept out the cold. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward them. Sienna closed her book slowly. The twins stopped their card game mid-hand, and Lila, small, fragile Lila, sat up on her mattress and stared at the stranger standing beside Oilia. No one spoke. The silence was suffocating. Oilia forced herself to breathe. This is why I leave at 3:17 every day." Dante didn't respond. He just stood there, taking in every detail of the basement, the children, the poverty, the desperation. Marcus stepped forward, his hand sliding toward the knife in his boot. "Who is he?" Marcus demanded. "My boss," Oilia said quietly. "Your boss?" Marcus's voice rose. "Are you insane? You brought your Mafia Boss here?" "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice." "Not this time." Oilia's voice cracked, and suddenly she was crying. Hot, angry tears streaming down her face as 2 years of exhaustion and fear finally broke through. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry. I tried to keep this separate, tried to keep you safe, but I can't do it anymore. I can't keep lying. I can't keep pretending. I can't." Strong hands gripped her shoulders. Oilia looked up through blurred vision and found Dante standing in front of her. His expression was no longer unreadable. It was fury. Not at her. At everything else. "How long?" Dante asked, his voice low and dangerous. Oilia wiped her eyes. "What? How long have you been doing this alone?" 2 years, since Ruth died. And you've been feeding them, clothing them, keeping them hidden, all by yourself." It wasn't a question. Oilia nodded. Dante's jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle ticking beneath his skin. Then he turned to face the children. Marcus immediately stepped in front of the others, his hand still hovering near his knife. "If you even think about calling the cops—" "I'm not calling anyone," Dante said. Marcus blinked. "What?" Dante's gaze swept over the basement again. "How many of you are there?" 6, Sienna said quietly from her mattress. "Ages?" 7 to 17. Dante nodded slowly, like he was processing information. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Oilia's heart stopped. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Dante held up one finger, Yeek, the same gesture he used when he wanted her to wait. Someone answered on the other end. "Vincent," Dante said, "I need you to find me a property. Residential, at least 4 bedrooms, safe neighborhood, and I need it by Monday." Oilia's knees went weak. "Yes," Dante continued. "I'm serious. Price doesn't matter. Just find it." He ended the call and looked at Oilia. "You're not doing this alone anymore." Oilia couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. Marcus was the one who finally broke the silence. "Why?" he asked suspiciously. "Why would you help us?" Dante's gaze shifted to Marcus, then to each of the other children in turn. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago." Dante left 20 minutes later with a promise to return. Oilia walked him back to the train station in a daze, her mind spinning. When they reached the platform, Dante stopped and turned to face her. "Monday morning," he said. "I'll have keys to the house." "I can't accept—" "You can, and you will." Oilia's throat tightened. "Why are you doing this?" Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so unexpected and tender that Oilia forgot how to breathe. "Because you're the bravest person I've ever met," Dante said softly. "And I'm tired of watching you suffer." The train pulled into the station. Dante stepped aboard without another word, leaving Oilia standing alone on the platform with tears streaming down her face. That weekend passed in a blur. Oilia barely slept, barely ate. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. For Dante to change his mind. For social services to show up at the basement door. But nothing happened. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Oilia went to work with her stomach in knots, half expecting to find her desk cleared out and a termination letter waiting. Instead, she found Dante standing in the reception area with a set of keys in his hand. He didn't say anything, just held them out. Oilia stared at the keys like they might disappear if she blinked. "It's a brownstone in Lincoln Park," Dante said. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, furnished. The utilities are already set up in my name." Oilia's hands shook as she took the keys. "I don't understand," she whispered. "What's not to understand?" This is too much. I can't pay you back for—" "I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" Dante's expression softened slightly. "I'm asking you to stop killing yourself trying to save everyone alone." The words cracked something open inside Oilia's chest. She looked down at the keys in her palm, feeling the weight of them, feeling the impossible gift Dante had just given her. "Thank you," she whispered. It felt inadequate, like trying to describe the ocean with a single drop of water. But it was all she had. Dante nodded once. "Move them in this weekend. I'll have security set up around the property by Friday." "Security?" "Volkov knows your face now," Dante said quietly. "That makes you a target. And if you're a target, so are the kids." Oilia's blood ran cold. What if he won't," Dante said firmly. Because you're under my protection now, and everyone in this city knows what that means. The weight of those words settled over Oilia like a blanket. Protection. She was under Dante Calvetti's protection, which meant she was also under his control. Before Oilia could respond, Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. I have to go, he said. But I'll check on you later. He was halfway to the elevator when Oilia called out. Dante? He stopped and turned. Oilia took a shaky breath. Why do you care? Dante held her gaze for a long, silent moment. Then he said something that made her heart stutter. Because you remind me of someone I failed to protect a long time ago. And I don't fail twice. The elevator doors closed. And Oilia stood alone in the reception area, clutching the keys to a future she never thought she deserved. That Friday, Oilia moved the children into the brownstone. It was surreal. Watching Marcus carry boxes up the front steps. Watching Sienna choose her own bedroom for the first time in her life. Watching the twins run through the halls, their laughter echoing off walls that actually had heat and running water. Watching Lila fall asleep in a real bed with clean sheets and a nightlight that didn't run on batteries. Oilia stood in the doorway of Lila's new room, tears streaming silently down her face. She had done it. After 2 years of fighting and starving and praying and breaking herself into pieces, she had finally given them something real. Something safe. Footsteps sounded behind her. Oilia turned and found Dante standing in the hallway, his coat dusted with snow from outside. You came, she said softly. I said I would. Dante's gaze moved past her to where Lila was sleeping peacefully, then back to Oilia's tear-stained face. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Oilia laughed, a broken, watery sound. I don't know, she admitted. I've spent so long just trying to survive that I don't know what to do now that we're actually safe. Dante stepped closer. You take care of yourself, he said. For once. Oilia shook her head. I don't know how. Then I'll teach you. The words hung between them like a promise. Oilia looked up at Dante, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes she had never noticed before. Loneliness. The same crushing, suffocating loneliness she carried every single day. Without thinking, Oilia reached out and took his hand. Dante went very still. Thank you, Oilia whispered, for all of this, for seeing me when no one else did. Dante's fingers tightened around hers. And for just a moment, standing in the hallway of a house full of rescued children, two broken people held on to each other like they were the only solid thing left in the world. The attack came 3 days later. Oilia was walking home from the grocery store when the black van pulled up beside her. She had just enough time to register the Bratva insignia on the side before rough hands grabbed her from behind and yanked her off the sidewalk. She tried to scream, a hand clamped over her mouth. The world went dark as a hood was shoved over her head, and Oilia was thrown into the back of the van. Her head cracked against metal, and pain exploded through her skull. She heard tires squealing, heard voices speaking rapid Russian, and then she heard nothing at all. Image. When Oilia woke up, she was tied to a chair in a freezing warehouse. Her head throbbed, her wrists burned where the ropes cut into her skin, and her entire body shook with cold and terror. Someone ripped the hood off her head. Volkov stood in front of her, smiling that same cold, empty smile. "Hello, Miss Thorne," he said pleasantly. "I believe we have some business to discuss." Oilia's voice came out as a ragged whisper. "What do you want?" "I want Dante Calvetti to understand that he doesn't get to protect people in my territory without consequences." Volkov pulled out a knife. Oilia's breath stopped. "So here's what's going to happen," Volkov continued. "You're going to call your boss, and you're going to tell him that if he wants to see you alive again, he's going to give me everything I ask for." He pressed the knife against Oilia's throat. "And if he refuses," Volkov whispered, "I'm going to cut you into pieces and mail them to him one at a time." The knife was cold against Oilia's throat. She could feel her pulse hammering against the blade with every ragged breath. Volkov's face swam in and out of focus as her vision blurred from the pain in her skull and the terror flooding her veins. "Make the call," Volkov said softly, pulling out a phone with his free hand. Oilia's lips were numb. He won't give you anything for me. Volkov laughed, a low, amused sound that made her skin crawl. You really believe that, don't you? He leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. You think Dante Calvetti spent 72 hours finding you a house because he doesn't care? You think he put armed guards on your street because you're just his secretary? The knife pressed harder. Oilia whimpered. He cares, Volkov whispered. Which makes you the most valuable thing he owns right now. He pulled back slightly and dialed a number, then held the phone to Oilia's ear. It rang once, twice. Then Dante's voice cut through the line like broken glass. Who is this? Volkov smiled and spoke loudly enough for Dante to hear. Hello, old friend. I have something that belongs to you. Silence. Then Dante's voice again, quieter now, colder. If you've hurt her... Oh, she's alive, Volkov interrupted cheerfully. For now. But her continued survival depends entirely on your cooperation. What do you want? The docks, all of them, and the distribution routes through Indiana. Another pause. Oilia could barely breathe. That's a third of my operation, Dante said. I'm aware. You're insane if you think... Volkov pressed the knife harder against Oilia's throat, and she gasped in pain. The sound must have carried through the phone because Dante's voice turned lethal. Don't touch her. Then give me what I want, Volkov said calmly. You have 12 hours to transfer control of the territories. After that, I start sending you pieces of your secretary. He ended the call. Oilia's entire body was shaking so violently, the chair rattled beneath her. Volkov tucked the phone back into his pocket and studied her with clinical interest. He'll give me everything, Volkov said. Men like Dante always do when something soft gets caught in the crossfire. You don't know him, Oilia whispered. I know him better than you think. Volkov turned and walked toward the far end of the warehouse, leaving Oilia tied to the chair in the center of the freezing concrete space. Two armed men stood near the door, their expressions blank and bored. Oilia tested the ropes around her wrists. They didn't budge. Her mind raced, searching desperately for a way out. But there was nothing. No weapons within reach, no loose knots, no windows low enough to break through even if her hands were free. She was trapped, completely and utterly trapped, and Dante was going to destroy his entire empire to save her. The thought made Oilia want to vomit. Basik. Hours crawled past. Oilia lost track of time in the dark warehouse. Her wrists were bleeding now, the ropes soaked with blood from her desperate attempts to twist free. Her head pounded, her throat ached from thirst, and the cold was unbearable. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, couldn't stop her teeth from chattering. Somewhere in the distance, she heard footsteps approaching. Volkov appeared again, this time carrying a tablet. 6 hours left, he said, showing her the screen. It displayed a map of Chicago with territories marked in different colors, red for Calvetti, blue for Bratva, and several sections that were currently contested, marked in purple. Your boyfriend hasn't transferred anything yet, Volkov continued, which means either he's stalling or he doesn't care as much as I thought. Oilia's voice came out hoarse. He's not my boyfriend. No? Volkov tilted his head. Then what is he? My boss. Your boss who bought you a house, who stationed armed guards outside your door, who's about to hand over a third of his empire to keep you breathing. Volkov crouched down in front of her chair, his blue eyes cold and calculating. What did you do to make Dante Calvetti care about you, Miss Thorne? Nothing, Oilia whispered. I didn't do anything. Then you're even more dangerous than I thought. He stood and walked away again, leaving Oilia alone with her terror. The attack came at the 10-hour mark. Oilia heard it before she saw it, the sudden explosion of gunfire that shattered the warehouse's eerie silence. Shouting in Russian, the sharp crack of bullets hitting metal. Then the screaming started. One of Volkov's guards near the door crumpled to the ground, blood blooming across his chest. The second guard raised his weapon, but another shot rang out and he dropped like a stone. The warehouse doors exploded inward, and Dante Calvetti stepped through the smoke like death incarnate. He was covered in blood. Whether his own or someone else's, Oilia couldn't tell. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was torn and stained, and the gun in his hand was still smoking. Behind him, 6 more men poured into the warehouse. weapons raised. Volkov appeared from the shadows, his own gun drawn. "You're early," Volkov called out calmly. Dante didn't respond. He just started walking toward Oilia, his gray eyes locked on her face with an intensity that made her chest ache. "Another step and I put a bullet in her head," Volkov said, pressing his gun against Oilia's temple. Dante stopped. The entire warehouse went silent. Oilia could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "Let her go," Dante said quietly. "Give me the territories first." "No?" Volkov's expression darkened. "Then she dies." "If you kill her," Dante said, his voice dropping to something that barely sounded human, "I will burn everything you love to the ground. Your men, your family, your entire organization. I will hunt down every person who ever meant anything to you and make sure they die screaming." The warehouse seemed to hold its breath. Volkov laughed softly. "You're bluffing. Try me." Something in Dante's eyes must have convinced him because Volkov's smile faltered. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. And that was when Marcus appeared. He came out of nowhere, a shadow moving through the darkness, and slammed into Volkov from behind. The gun went off, the bullet whizzing past Oilia's head so close she felt the heat of it. Then everything exploded into chaos. Dante's men opened fire. Volkov's remaining guards returned shots. Marcus wrestled with Volkov on the concrete floor, both of them fighting for control of the weapon. And Dante crossed the distance to Oilia in 3 long strides. He dropped to his knees beside her chair and pulled out a knife, slicing through the ropes with quick, efficient movements. The moment her hands were free, Oilia collapsed forward into his arms. "I've got you," Dante said roughly, his voice shaking. "I've got you, sweetheart." Oilia tried to speak, but no words came out. Dante lifted her effortlessly and started carrying her toward the exit. Behind them, Marcus had managed to pin Volkov to the ground, the teenager's knife pressed against the Russian's throat. "Marcus, let's go!" Dante shouted. Marcus hesitated. For one terrible moment, Oilia thought he might actually kill Volkov. Then he shoved himself upright and ran after them. They made it outside just as more gunfire erupted inside the warehouse. Dante's black Mercedes was parked at the curb, engine already running. He shoved Oilia into the back seat and climbed in after her while Marcus threw himself into the front passenger seat. The driver hit the gas. They peeled away from the warehouse as it erupted in flames behind them. Oilia didn't remember the drive back. She sat pressed against Dante's side, shaking so violently she couldn't stop. His arm was locked around her shoulders, holding her against his chest while he spoke rapidly into his phone, issuing orders to people she couldn't see. When they finally stopped, Oilia realized they were at the brownstone. Dante carried her inside. The house was full of people, armed guards positioned at every entrance, medics setting up equipment in the living room, and all 6 children huddled together on the couch, looking terrified. Lila saw Oilia and started crying. "Put me down," Oilia whispered. Dante hesitated. "Please." He set her carefully on her feet, and Oilia immediately limped across the room to where the children were waiting. Lila threw herself into Oilia's arms, sobbing, and the twins grabbed onto her waist. "You're okay," Oilia whispered, running her hands over their heads. "You're all okay." "We thought they took you," Sienna said, her voice shaking. "Marcus left to find you, and we didn't know if—" "I'm fine," Oilia said, even though it was a lie. She looked up and found Marcus standing in the doorway, his clothes still covered in blood. Their eyes met. "Thank you," Oilia mouthed. Marcus nodded once, then turned and disappeared down the hallway. A medic approached Oilia cautiously. "Ma'am, we need to check you for injuries." Oilia shook her head. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." Oilia glanced down and saw that her wrists were still oozing blood, the skin raw and torn from the ropes. "Just bandage them," she said quietly. The medic led her to a chair and started cleaning the wounds. Oilia sat numbly, staring at nothing while the children pressed close around her. Across the room, Dante stood with his arms folded, speaking in low tones with one of his men, but his eyes kept drifting back to her. An hour later, the house finally emptied. The medics left. The guards stationed themselves outside, and the children reluctantly went upstairs to bed, though Oilia knew none of them would actually sleep. Oilia sat alone in the kitchen, a mug of tea cooling in her bandaged hands. She heard footsteps behind her. Dante appeared in the doorway, his shirt still stained with blood, his face carved from exhaustion. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "I can't." Dante crossed the kitchen and sat down across from her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Oilia whispered, "You almost gave him everything." "I would have." "Why?" Dante's jaw tightened. "Because losing territory is survivable. Losing you isn't." The words hit Oilia like a physical blow. "You barely know me," she said, her voice breaking. "I know enough. You know I'm a secretary who takes care of kids in a basement. That's all you know." "No," Dante said quietly. "I know you're someone who starves herself to feed children who aren't even hers. Someone who walks through enemy territory every night because keeping them safe matters more than keeping yourself alive. Someone who stood between me and those kids even while shaking with fear." He leaned forward. "I know you're the strongest person I've ever met," Dante said. "And I know that losing you would break something in me I didn't even realize still existed." Oilia's hands trembled around the mug. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" Dante was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I had a sister once." Oilia's breath caught. "Her name was Isabella," Dante continued, his voice rough. "She was kind, gentle, always trying to save things. Injured birds, stray cats, people who didn't deserve her kindness." His hands clenched into fists on the table. "When I was 22, I got pulled into my father's organization. I thought I could keep her separate from that world, thought I could protect her while still building an empire." Dante's eyes went distant. "I was wrong." Oilia didn't breathe. "One of my father's enemies kidnapped her," Dante said. "They wanted leverage, wanted territory, wanted power. And I refused to give it to them because I thought I could negotiate, thought I was smart enough to outmaneuver them." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They killed her. And they made sure I knew it was my fault." Tears burned in Oilia's eyes. "Dante, you remind me of her," Dante said, looking up. "Not because you look alike, but because you have the same softness, the same refusal to let cruelty destroy your capacity to care." He reached across the table and took her bandaged hand in his. "And when I saw you taking care of those kids," Dante said, "risking everything to keep them safe, I realized I was being given a second chance. A chance to protect someone who deserved protecting. A chance to not fail again." Oilia's tears spilled over. "I'm not your sister," she whispered. "I know." "Then why?" "Because somewhere along the way," Dante interrupted softly, "you stopped being a second chance and started being something else entirely." The air between them felt electric, dangerous. Oilia should pull her hand away, should put distance between them before this became something she couldn't walk away from. But she didn't move, because for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel alone. Check. They sat in the kitchen until dawn broke over Chicago. Neither of them slept. They just talked. About Isabella, about Ruth, about the weight of carrying people who depended on you for survival, about the guilt that came with every small failure, and the exhaustion of never being enough. At some point, Dante moved to sit beside her instead of across from her. At some point, Oilia leaned her head against his shoulder. And at some point, their fingers intertwined without either of them acknowledging it. When the sun finally rose, painting the kitchen in pale gold light, Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. "What?" Oilia asked. Dante showed her the message. It was a photo of the brownstone, taken from across the street sometime in the last hour. Below the image was a single line of text. "She's not safe, and neither are you." Oilia's blood turned to ice. "Volkov escaped," Dante said quietly. "What?" "During the firefight. He got out through a back exit." Dante's jaw clenched. "And now he knows where you live." Oilia stood abruptly, panic flooding her chest. "The kids are protected," Dante said firmly. "I have men stationed around the entire block. Volkov won't get near them." "You can't know that." "Yes, I can." But Oilia could hear the doubt beneath his certainty, could see the fear he was trying to hide. She crossed the kitchen and looked out the window at the quiet street below. Everything looked normal, peaceful. But somewhere out there, Volkov was watching, waiting, planning his next move. "We can't stay here," Oilia said. "We're not running." Dante, I said we're not running. His voice was steel. Volkov wants you terrified, wants you to feel hunted. That's how he wins. Oilia turned to face him. "Then what do we do?" Dante's expression shifted into something cold and calculating. "We make him regret ever touching you." The plan was simple. Volkov wanted territory, wanted power, wanted to prove he could break Dante Calvetti. So Dante was going to give him a war. Over the next 3 days, Oilia watched Dante transform from the quiet, controlled man she thought she knew into something far more dangerous. He moved through the city like a storm, hitting Bratva operations with surgical precision. Warehouses burned, supply lines were cut, key lieutenants disappeared, and every attack carried the same message. "You took something of mine. Now I'm taking everything of yours." Oilia tried to stay out of it, tried to focus on the children, on keeping them calm and safe while the city burned around them. But she couldn't stop watching Dante, couldn't stop noticing the way violence sat on him like a second skin, the way he gave orders that would result in deaths without hesitation, the way his hands, the same hands that had held her so gently in the kitchen, were stained with blood more often than not. On the 4th night, Dante came back to the brownstone at 2 a.m. Oilia was awake, sitting in the living room with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her. "You should be sleeping," Dante said. "So should you." He walked over and sank onto the couch beside her, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "How bad is it?" Oilia asked quietly. "Bad." "Are we winning?" Dante's laugh was hollow. "There's no winning in a war like this, just survival." Oilia pulled the blanket tighter. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't been so careless, if I hadn't let Volkov see me—" "Stop." Dante's hand caught her chin, gently turning her face toward his. "This is not your fault," he said firmly. "Volkov has been looking for an excuse to go after me for years. You just happen to be the leverage he chose. But the kids are safer now than they've ever been. You gave them a home, a family, a future. Don't let Volkov's cruelty make you doubt that." Oilia's eyes burned. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know. What if something happens to them? What if Volkov—" Dante leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, his voice dropping to something raw and honest. "I won't let him touch them. Or you. I swear it." Oilia believed him, which was why what happened next destroyed her completely. The betrayal came from inside. 3 days later, Oilia was in the kitchen making breakfast when Marcus appeared in the doorway. He looked pale, shaken. "Marcus?" Oilia set down the spatula. "What's wrong?" Marcus didn't answer. He just handed her his phone. On the screen was a message from an unknown number. "Your boss killed my brother. Did he tell you that?" Oilia's blood went cold. "What is this?" she whispered. Marcus's voice was hollow. "I did some digging, asked around, and I found out that 2 years ago, Dante Calvetti executed a 17-year-old kid who was running numbers for the Italians." Oilia shook her head. "That's not—" "The kid's name was Aaron Torres," Marcus continued, his voice shaking, "and he was my half-brother." The world tilted. "No," Oilia breathed. "Dante Calvetti is the reason my brother is dead," Marcus said, "and you brought him into our lives." Oilia couldn't speak, couldn't think. Marcus's expression twisted with rage and grief. "How could you?" he whispered. "How could you let the man who destroyed my family anywhere near us?" "I didn't know," Oilia said desperately. "Marcus, I swear I didn't—" "It doesn't matter." Marcus turned and walked out of the kitchen. Oilia stood frozen, the phone still clutched in her trembling hand. She needed to talk to Dante, needed to hear him deny it, but deep down, she already knew the truth. Because Dante Calvetti wasn't a savior. He was a killer, and Oilia had just invited him into the one safe place she had left. Oilia found Dante in his office at Calvetti Tower. He was standing by the window, his back to the door, one hand pressed against the glass as he stared out at the Chicago skyline. He didn't turn when she entered. didn't acknowledge her presence at all. But she knew he heard her. "Is it true?" Oilia asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Dante's shoulders tensed. "Is what true? Did you kill a 17-year-old boy named Aaron Torres 2 years ago?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Dante turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Yes." The single word hit Oilia like a gunshot. She had hoped, desperately, foolishly hoped, that it was a lie, that Volkov had planted false information to drive a wedge between them. But Dante wasn't denying it. "He was Marcus's brother," Oilia whispered. Dante's jaw tightened. "I know." "You knew?" Oilia's voice rose. "You knew and you never said anything?" "What was I supposed to say?" Dante asked quietly. "That I executed a kid who was running money for the Italians? That I put a bullet in his head because he made the mistake of skimming from the wrong organization?" Oilia's hands clenched into fists. "He was 17 years old. He was a criminal. He was a child." "He made a choice," Dante said, his voice hardening. "And that choice had consequences." Oilia stared at him, her chest heaving. "How can you say that?" she breathed. "How can you stand there and justify murdering a kid? Because in my world, mercy gets you killed." Dante took a step toward her. Aaron Torres knew what he was getting into when he started working for the Italians. He knew the risks. And when he stole from them, he signed his own death warrant. "So you just executed him without a second thought?" "I gave him a chance," Dante said coldly. "I told him to return the money and disappear. He refused. Said he wasn't afraid of me." His eyes darkened. 3 days later, the Italians came to me and demanded I handle it as a show of good faith, so I did. Oilia felt like she was drowning. "And you never thought to tell me this?" she asked. "Never thought that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to know that the man I let into my home killed Marcus's brother." "Would it have changed anything?" Dante asked. "Yes," Oilia shouted. "It would have changed everything." "How?" "Because I would have known what you really are." The words hung between them like broken glass. Dante's expression went blank. "And what am I, Oilia?" "A killer," she whispered. "Just another killer in a city full of killers." Dante flinched. It was barely visible, just a slight tightening around his eyes. But Oilia saw it, and it broke something inside her. "I need you to leave the brownstone," Oilia said quietly. "No." "Dante." "I said no." His voice was steel. "Volkov is still out there. You're still in danger. I'm not leaving you unprotected." "Then leave guards," Oilia said desperately. "Leave security. Leave whatever you want. But I can't have you in that house anymore." "Why?" "Because I'm not the man you thought I was? Because Marcus can't heal with you there." Oilia's voice cracked. "Because every time he looks at you, he sees the person who destroyed his family. And I can't ask him to live with that. I won't." Dante stared at her for a long moment. Then he said something that made her chest ache. "What about what you need?" Oilia's breath caught. "What?" "You heard me?" Dante said quietly. "What about what you need, Oilia? You've spent 2 years putting everyone else first. The kids, Marcus, strangers who needed help. When do you get to choose something for yourself?" "This isn't about me." "Yes, it is." Dante crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. "Because you're terrified of letting me close. Terrified of admitting that you need someone just as much as those kids need you. That's not true." "Then why are your hands shaking?" Oilia looked down and realized he was right. Her entire body was trembling. Dante reached out and caught her wrist gently, his thumbs brushing over the bandages still wrapped around her torn skin. "I'm not asking you to forgive me for what I did to Aaron Torres," Dante said. "I'm not even asking you to understand it. But I am asking you to let me keep you safe. Because if something happens to you, I won't survive it." Oilia's eyes burned. "You don't get to do this," she whispered. "You don't get to make me care about you and then turn out to be exactly what I was running from my whole life. I never pretended to be anything other than what I am." "No," Oilia agreed, "but I pretended you were something different, something better." She pulled her hands free and stepped back. "I need time," Oilia said. I need space to figure out what this means. For me, for Marcus, for all of us. Dante's expression shuddered. How much time? I don't know. Then I'll wait. He turned and walked back to the window, his shoulders rigid. Oilia stood there for another moment, her heart breaking into pieces. Then she left without another word. The walk back to the brownstone felt like drowning. Oilia kept replaying the conversation in her head, searching for something she could have said differently. Some way she could have made this hurt less. But there was no version of this that didn't hurt, because Dante had killed Marcus's brother, and Oilia had fallen for him anyway. When she finally reached the brownstone, Marcus was waiting on the front steps. He looked up as she approached, his expression guarded. Did you talk to him? Marcus asked. Oilia nodded. And? He admitted it, Oilia said quietly. He killed Aaron, and he's not sorry. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. I want him out of this house. I know, I told him to leave. Marcus looked surprised. You did? Of course I did. Oilia sank onto the step beside him. You're my family, Marcus. You come first, always. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I don't know how to do this. Do what? Hate him, Marcus admitted. I want to hate him for what he did to Aaron. Want to hate him for being a killer. But he also saved your life. Gave us this house. Protected us when no one else would. His voice broke. How am I supposed to feel about that? Oilia put her arm around his shoulders. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know either. They sat together on the steps as the sun set over Chicago, two broken people trying to make sense of a world that didn't make sense. 3 days passed. Dante didn't come back to the brownstone, but his guards remained stationed around the block, silent shadows keeping watch through the night. Oilia threw herself into taking care of the kids, made breakfast, helped with homework, read bedtime stories, pretended everything was fine even though she felt like she was suffocating. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation she'd ever had with Dante, searching for the moment she should have seen what he really was. On the 4th day, everything fell apart. Oilia was walking back from the grocery store when she noticed the car. Black sedan, tinted windows, parked across the street from the brownstone. Her heart started racing. She walked faster, her eyes scanning the area for Dante's guards. They were gone. All of them. Panic flooded Oilia's chest. She broke into a run, the grocery bags bouncing against her legs as she sprinted toward the house. The front door was open. Oilia dropped the bags and ran inside. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. Lila! Oilia shouted. Marcus! Sienna! No answer. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Every bedroom was empty, every closet, every bathroom. The house was completely silent, and the children were gone. Oilia stood in the hallway, her entire body shaking, and pulled out her phone with trembling hands. She called Dante. He answered on the first ring. Oilia. They're gone, Oilia choked out. The kids are gone. All of them. Someone took them. Silence. Then Dante's voice, colder than she'd ever heard it. Where are you? At the brownstone. Get out of the house, now. But now, Oilia. She ran. Oilia flew down the stairs and out the front door, her legs burning as she sprinted down the street. She made it 2 blocks before a black Mercedes screeched to a stop beside her. The passenger door flew open. Get in, Dante shouted. Oilia threw herself into the car and Dante hit the gas before she even had the door closed. What happened? Dante demanded. I don't know, Oilia sobbed. I came back from the store and everyone was gone. Your guards, the kids, everyone. Dante's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Volkov. How do you know? Because 3 of my men just turned up dead in an alley 2 blocks from your house. Dante's voice was lethal. He killed them and took the kids. Oilia's vision blurred. No, 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 no. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Oilia answered with shaking hands. Hello, Miss Thorne. Volkov's voice came through the speaker, smooth and poisonous. I believe I have something that belongs to you. Where are they? Oilia whispered. Safe, for now. If you hurt them, then you'll what? Volkov laughed. You're not in a position to make threats, but I am. Oilia could barely breathe. What do you want? I want Dante Calvetti to understand that he can't protect the things he cares about. So here's what's going to happen. He's going to meet me at the old meatpacking plant on the south side, alone, unarmed. Volkov paused. And if he doesn't show up in 1 hour, I'm going to kill one of these children every 15 minutes until he does. The line went dead. Oilia stared at the phone, her entire body numb. Dante pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her. I'm going, he said. You can't. I don't have a choice. He'll kill you. Probably. Dante, but if I don't go, he'll kill them, Dante interrupted. And I'm not letting that happen. Oilia grabbed his arm. There has to be another way. There isn't. Dante covered her hand with his gray eyes burning with something that looked like regret. I need you to stay here, he said quietly. Stay somewhere safe. Let me handle this. I'm not letting you go alone. Oilia? Those are my kids, Oilia shouted. My family. You think I'm going to sit here and do nothing while they're in danger? You'll get yourself killed. Then I'll die protecting them. Just like you're about to die protecting me. Dante stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression. You're not going to let me talk you out of this, are you? No. He exhaled slowly. Fine. But you do exactly what I say. No arguments, no heroics. Understand? Oilia nodded. Dante pulled back onto the road and headed south. The meatpacking plant loomed against the night sky like a graveyard. Rusted metal, broken windows. The smell of decay and old blood thickened the air. Dante parked the Mercedes a block away and turned to Oilia. When we get inside, stay behind me. Don't speak unless I tell you to. And if I say run, you run. You don't look back. You don't hesitate. You just go. Oilia's throat was tight. Okay. Dante reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a gun. He held it out to her. Do you know how to use this? Oilia shook her head. Safety off, point, pull the trigger. That's all you need to know. She took the weapon with trembling hands. It felt heavier than she expected. Dante pulled out a second gun and checked the chamber. Ready? He asked. No, she wasn't ready. But she nodded anyway. They got out of the car and walked toward the plant. The front entrance was hanging off its hinges. Dante pushed it open carefully, his gun raised. Inside, the plant was dark and cavernous. Rusted hooks hung from the ceiling like skeletal fingers. Old conveyor belts snaked through the shadows, and somewhere in the distance, Oilia could hear voices. Dante moved forward silently, and Oilia followed. They made it halfway through the main floor when the lights suddenly blazed to life. Oilia's eyes watered from the sudden brightness. When her vision cleared, she saw them. 6 children tied to chairs in the center of the room. Marcus, Sienna, the twins, Lila, and one more, a girl Oilia didn't recognize, maybe 13 or 14, with dark hair and terrified eyes. Volkov stood behind them, a gun pressed against the back of Lila's head. Welcome, Dante, Volkov said pleasantly. So glad you could make it. Dante's gun didn't waver. Let them go. Put the gun down first. No. Volkov pressed the gun harder against Lila's skull. The little girl whimpered. Oilia's heart stopped. Put it down, Volkov repeated, or I'll paint the floor with her brains. Dante's jaw clenched. Then slowly, carefully, he lowered his weapon and set it on the ground. Kick it away. Dante kicked the gun across the concrete. Volkov smiled. Good. Now you. He nodded at Oilia. Oilia's hand shook as she set her gun down. Kick it. She kicked it toward Dante's weapon. Excellent, Volkov said. Now we can have a civilized conversation. You got what you wanted, Dante said coldly. Let the kids go. Oh, I'm not done yet. Volkov gestured to the girl Oilia didn't recognize. Do you know who this is? Dante's expression didn't change. No. Her name is Katya, Volkov said. And she's my daughter. Oilia's blood turned to ice. 2 months ago, Volkov continued, your men raided one of my warehouses. They killed 16 people, and they took Katya. He walked around the chair slowly, his gun still pressed against Lila's head. I've been looking for her ever since, Volkov said. Imagine my surprise when I discovered she was living in a house you purchased, being cared for by your little secretary. Oilia's mind raced. The girl. The one who had shown up at the basement shelter 3 months ago, scared and alone and refusing to give her real name. Oilia had thought she was just another runaway, but she was Volkov's daughter. I didn't know, Oilia whispered. I believe you, Volkov said, which is why I'm going to give you a choice. He pulled the gun away from Lila and aimed it at Katya instead. You can have 5 of these children back, Volkov said, but Katya comes with me, or you can refuse and I'll kill all 6 of them right now. Dante's voice was ice. You're insane. I'm a father getting his daughter back. Volkov's finger tightened on the trigger. So what's it going to be? Oilia's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. 5 kids. Or 6 dead. It wasn't even a choice. Take her, Oilia said. Katya's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror. No, the girl whispered. Please. Please don't send me back to him. Volkov smiled. You heard her, Katya. Even your precious Oilia doesn't want you. That's not true, Oilia said desperately. Katya, I'm so sorry. Enough, Volkov said. He walked over and grabbed Katya by the arm, hauling her out of the chair. The girl started crying, and Oilia felt her soul breaking. Wait, Dante said suddenly. Volkov paused. Let me make you a different offer, Dante said. I'm listening. You want revenge? Dante asked. You want to hurt me? Fine. Take me instead of the girl. Volkov laughed. You think I want you dead? That's too easy. Then what do you want? Volkov's smile widened. I want you to live with the knowledge that you failed, that you couldn't protect the people you care about. That's a far better punishment than death. He started dragging Katya toward the exit, and something inside Oilia snapped. She didn't think, didn't plan. She just moved. Oilia lunged for the gun she had kicked away, her fingers closing around the grip. She raised it, aimed at Volkov, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening. Volkov screamed and dropped to the ground, clutching his shoulder. Katya wrenched free and ran, and suddenly everything exploded into chaos. More gunshots rang out from the shadows. Volkov's men poured into the room from hidden positions, their weapons raised. Dante dove for his gun and came up firing. Oilia grabbed Katya and shoved her toward the other children, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the weapon. Untie them! Oilia shouted. Katya's fingers fumbled with the ropes binding Marcus's wrists. Dante was fighting 3 men at once, his movements brutal and efficient. But there were too many. For every man he dropped, 2 more appeared. Oilia fired blindly into the darkness, not knowing if she was hitting anything. The gun clicked empty. She threw it aside and started pulling at Sienna's ropes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. A hand grabbed her hair from behind. Oilia screamed as she was yanked backward. One of Volkov's men stood over her, his gun aimed at her face. Say goodbye. The gunshot came from Oilia's left. The man crumpled. Marcus stood there holding a gun he must have taken from one of the fallen guards, his hands shaking. Go! Marcus shouted. Oilia grabbed Lila and the twins, shoving them toward the exit. Sienna and Katya ran ahead, supporting each other. Behind them, Dante was still fighting, bleeding, outnumbered. Dante! Oilia screamed. He looked back. Their eyes met, and Oilia saw him make a choice. Dante turned and sprinted after them, abandoning the fight. They burst out of the meatpacking plant into the freezing night. The Mercedes was still parked a block away. They ran. Oilia's lungs burned. Her legs screamed, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. They reached the car. Dante threw open the doors and started shoving kids inside. Go, go, go! Oilia climbed into the passenger seat. Dante hit the gas. The Mercedes roared to life and peeled away from the curb just as more gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets shattered the back window. Lila screamed. Dante swerved violently, tires squealing. And then they were gone, racing through the dark streets of Chicago with 6 terrified children crammed into the back seat and Volkov's voice echoing in Oilia's head. I want you to live with the knowledge that you failed, but they hadn't failed. They had survived, for now. Dante drove for 20 minutes before finally pulling into an underground parking garage. He killed the engine. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lila started crying. Oilia unbuckled her seatbelt and climbed into the back, pulling the little girl into her arms. "It's okay," Oilia whispered. "It's over. You're safe." But it wasn't over, and they both knew it. Dante turned in his seat, his face pale and covered in blood. "Is everyone okay?" he asked. Marcus nodded shakily. Sienna was clutching the twins, and Katya sat pressed against the door, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," Katya whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring this on you. I didn't know where else to go." Oilia reached over and took the girl's hand. "It's not your fault," Oilia said firmly. "But your father made his own choices. You're not responsible for them." Katya's shoulders shook with sobs. Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. "What?" Oilia asked. Dante showed her the message. It was from Volkov. A single photo of the brownstone, burning, and below it 3 words. "This isn't over." The brownstone was still burning when they arrived. Flames licked through the windows, painting the night sky orange and red. Smoke billowed into the cold air, carrying with it everything Oilia had fought to build over the past 2 weeks. The beds, the books, the sense of safety she had tried so desperately to give the children. All of it turning to ash. Oilia stood on the sidewalk with Lila clinging to her side, watching the fire department spray water onto a building that was already lost. The other children huddled together behind her, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. No one spoke. What was there to say? Dante stood a few feet away, his phone pressed to his ear as he barked orders at someone Oilia couldn't see. His shirt was still stained with blood from the fight at the meatpacking plant. His jaw was tight. His eyes were burning with something darker than the fire in front of them. When he finally ended the call, he walked over to Oilia. "We can't stay here," Dante said quietly. "I know. I have a safe house outside the city. We'll go there until..." "Until what?" Oilia interrupted, her voice hollow. "Until Volkov burns that down too? Until he kills one of us just to prove he can?" Dante's expression hardened. "That's not going to happen." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Oilia turned to face him, exhaustion and fury mixing in her chest. "How?" she demanded. "How can you possibly promise that when everything we touch turns to hell? The basement was supposed to be safe. The brownstone was supposed to be safe. And now it's all gone. We'll rebuild." "I don't want to rebuild," Oilia's voice cracked. "I want this to stop. I want the kids to be able to sleep without nightmares. I want to walk down the street without looking over my shoulder. I want..." She couldn't finish, because what she wanted was impossible. Dante reached out and caught her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I'm going to end this," he said. "Tonight." Oilia's breath caught. "What are you talking about? Volkov wanted a war. He's going to get one." "Dante, stay at the safe house with the kids," Dante continued, his voice dropping to something lethal. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone except me. Understand? You can't go after him alone. I won't be alone." "Then take me with you." "No." "Dante?" "I said no, Oilia." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "I've already put you in enough danger. I'm not doing it again." Oilia stared at him, her throat closing up. "What if you don't come back?" Dante's expression softened slightly. "Then you take the kids and you run. As far away from Chicago as you can get. You build a new life somewhere Volkov can't find you." "I don't want a life without you in it." The words slipped out before Oilia could stop them. Dante went very still. Then he pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the entire world. "I'll come back," he whispered into her hair. "I promise." Oilia didn't believe him, but she held on anyway. The safe house was a cabin an hour north of Chicago, hidden deep in the woods where the only sound was wind through bare trees. Dante's men stationed themselves around the perimeter while Oilia got the children settled inside. There were only 3 bedrooms, so the kids doubled up. The twins in one room, Sienna and Katya in another, and Marcus with Lila in the third. Oilia made hot chocolate she didn't drink and sandwiches no one touched. Then she sat in the small living room and waited. Marcus appeared in the doorway around midnight, his arms folded across his chest. "He's really going after Volkov?" Marcus asked. Oilia nodded. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know if I want him to come back." Oilia looked up sharply. "Marcus?" "He killed my brother," Marcus said, his voice rough. "And I know Aaron made bad choices. I know he got involved with people he shouldn't have. But he was still my brother, and Dante put a bullet in his head." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "How am I supposed to forgive that?" Oilia didn't have an answer, because she didn't know if she had forgiven it either. "I don't think Dante's asking for forgiveness," Oilia said quietly. "I think he's just trying to keep us alive. By killing more people? By doing what he knows how to do." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That doesn't make it right." "No," Oilia agreed. "It doesn't." They sat in silence, the weight of too many impossible choices pressing down on them both. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "If he doesn't come back," Marcus said slowly, "what are we going to do?" Oilia's throat ached. "We're going to survive," she whispered, "just like we always have." Oot. Dante arrived at Volkov's estate at 2:17 a.m. The compound was massive, a sprawling property on the edge of the city, surrounded by high walls and armed guards. Under normal circumstances, attacking it would be suicide. But Dante wasn't interested in normal circumstances. He came with 20 men, 3 armored vehicles, and enough firepower to level a city block. The first explosion took out the front gate. The second took out the guardhouse. By the time Volkov's men realized what was happening, Dante was already inside. Gunfire erupted across the compound like a symphony of violence. Dante moved through the chaos with brutal efficiency, his weapon never empty, his focus absolute. He wasn't here to negotiate, wasn't here to make deals. He was here to end this, permanently. Dante fought his way through the main house, stepping over bodies and shattered glass. His men cleared rooms on either side of him, their movements synchronized and ruthless. And then he found Volkov. The Russian was in his private office on the second floor, standing behind an antique desk with a gun in his hand. "I knew you'd come," Volkov said calmly. Dante raised his weapon. "Where's Katya?" "Safe. Away from this life." "You mean the life you forced her into?" Volkov's expression darkened. "I gave her everything." "You gave her nightmares," Dante said coldly. "You gave her trauma. You gave her a father who values power more than his own child. You don't know anything about being a father." "No," Dante agreed. "But I know what it means to fail the people you're supposed to protect. And you failed Katya the moment you made her a weapon instead of a daughter." Volkov's finger tightened on the trigger. "You think you're better than me?" Volkov asked. "You think your hands are any cleaner?" "We're the same, Dante. We're both killers, both monsters. The only difference is you lie to yourself about it." Dante's jaw clenched. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe we are the same. But there's one difference between us." "What's that?" "I know when to stop." Dante pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the office. Volkov dropped, and Dante stood there, breathing hard, staring down at the body of the man who had almost destroyed everything he cared about. He didn't feel triumph, didn't feel relief. He just felt tired. So impossibly tired. Behind him, one of his men appeared in the doorway. "Sir, the compound is secure." Dante holstered his weapon. "Burn it," he said. "Sir?" "I said burn it. All of it. I want nothing left." The man hesitated, then nodded and disappeared. Dante took one last look at Volkov's body. Then he turned and walked out of the office, leaving the past to burn behind him. Oilia was still awake when Dante's car pulled up to the cabin at dawn. She had been sitting by the window for hours, watching the driveway, her heart jumping at every sound. When she saw him step out of the black Mercedes, alive, bloodied, but alive, something inside her chest cracked open. Oilia ran outside barefoot, her breath misting in the cold morning air. Dante was halfway to the cabin when he saw her. He stopped. They stared at each other across the frost-covered ground. Then Oilia closed the distance and threw herself into his arms. Dante caught her, his grip almost painful in its intensity. "You came back," Oilia whispered against his chest. I promised. She pulled back just enough to look at his face. He was covered in soot and blood and exhaustion, but his eyes were clear. Is it over? Oilia asked. Yes. Volkov? Dead. Oilia should have felt something about that. Relief, satisfaction, something. But all she felt was numb. What happens now? She whispered. Dante's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Now we figure out how to live, he said quietly. What? The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of rebuilding. Dante bought a new house, smaller than the brownstone, but safer, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where no one asked questions. He hired contractors to renovate it, added security systems, made sure every window had bars and every door had 3 locks. Oilia threw herself into making it feel like home. She painted the bedrooms with the kids, hung curtains, filled the kitchen with secondhand dishes and mismatched silverware, built something real out of the wreckage of everything they had lost. And slowly, so slowly, they started to heal. Lila's nightmares became less frequent. The twins stopped flinching at loud noises. Sienna started reading again instead of just staring at walls. Katya was the hardest. The girl barely spoke for the first 2 weeks, just sat in her room, staring out the window like she expected her father to come back from the dead and drag her home. It took Oilia sitting with her every night, reading aloud from donated books, before Katya finally started to thaw. One evening, while Oilia was halfway through a chapter about a girl who survived a shipwreck, Katya interrupted. Why did you shoot him? Oilia paused, her finger marking the page. Your father? Yeah. Oilia set the book down carefully. Because he was going to take you, she said quietly. And I couldn't let that happen. Why not? Katya's voice was small, broken. I'm his daughter. Maybe I deserved. No. Oilia reached out and took the girl's hand. You didn't deserve any of what he put you through. And you sure as hell didn't deserve to go back to that life. Katya's eyes filled with tears. He's dead because of me. He's dead because of the choices he made. Not you. But if I hadn't run away, then you would still be trapped in a life that was killing you piece by piece, Oilia interrupted gently. You did the bravest thing you could have done. You saved yourself. Katya started crying, and Oilia held her, the same way Ruth had held Oilia 16 years ago on a frozen street corner, proving that sometimes the only way to survive is to let someone else carry you for a while. Marcus was different. He didn't cry, didn't break down, didn't talk about what had happened. He just got quieter, more withdrawn. Oilia found him one afternoon sitting on the back porch, staring at nothing. She sat down beside him without saying anything. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Marcus spoke. I keep thinking about Aaron. Oilia's chest tightened. What about him? She asked gently. I keep wondering if things would have been different if I'd been there. If I'd been a better brother. If I'd stopped him from getting involved with the Italians. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Maybe if I'd done something, he'd still be alive. Or maybe you'd both be dead, Oilia said quietly. Marcus looked at her sharply. Aaron made his own choices, Oilia continued, and those choices had consequences. That's not on you. Dante killed him. I know. And you're okay with that? Oilia was quiet for a long moment. No, she admitted. I'm not okay with it. I don't think I'll ever be okay with it, but I also know that Dante isn't the reason Aaron got involved in that world. He's just the one who pulled the trigger. Marcus's jaw tightened. That doesn't make it better. No, Oilia agreed. It doesn't. They sat together as the sun set over the yard, 2 people trying to make peace with a world that didn't offer easy answers. Finally, Marcus stood. I don't know if I can forgive him, Marcus said. You don't have to. But you have? Oilia thought about that. Had she forgiven Dante? She didn't know. Maybe forgiveness wasn't the right word. Maybe it was just acceptance. Acceptance that people were complicated, that they carried damage and made terrible choices and hurt the people they cared about, that nobody was purely good or purely evil, that sometimes the person who saved your life was also the person who destroyed someone else's. I'm trying, Oilia said finally. That's all I can do. Marcus nodded slowly. Then he walked back inside, leaving Oilia alone with her thoughts. Dante came by the house every evening. He never stayed long, just checked on the security, made sure everyone had what they needed, talked quietly with Oilia about logistics and safety protocols. But he never came inside, never sat down for dinner, never let himself be part of the family he had helped create. It took Oilia 3 weeks to realize why. He was keeping himself separate on purpose, protecting them from getting too close. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Oilia walked outside and found Dante sitting in his car in the driveway. She knocked on the window. Dante looked up, surprised, then rolled it down. "Everything okay?" he asked. "No," Oilia said. "You need to stop doing this." "Doing what?" "Keeping yourself at arm's length like you're some kind of monster we need to be protected from." Dante's expression shuddered. "Oilia, I'm serious," she interrupted. "You saved us. Multiple times. You gave us a home. You fought a war to keep us safe. And now you're acting like you don't deserve to be part of what you helped build." "Maybe I don't." "That's not your choice to make." Dante's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Marcus hates me," he said quietly. "Marcus is 17 years old and dealing with grief. He doesn't hate you. He just doesn't know what to do with everything he's feeling." "And you?" Dante asked. "What are you feeling?" Oilia took a breath. "I'm feeling like the man who killed Marcus's brother is also the man who saved my life. And I'm feeling like those two things can both be true at the same time." Dante stared at her. "I don't know how to be what you need," he said. "Then figure it out," Oilia said. "Because I'm tired of doing this alone. And whether you believe it or not, we need you." She stepped back from the car. "Dinner's at 6 tomorrow," Oilia said. "If you're not there, I'm coming to drag you here myself." She turned and walked back toward the house, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard the car door open, heard footsteps on the driveway, and then Dante's voice, rough and uncertain. "Oilia." She stopped and turned. Dante stood there in the fading light, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be part of a family. I don't know how to be anything other than what I've always been." Oilia walked back to him slowly. "Then we'll figure it out together," she said. She reached out and took his hand. Dante's fingers closed around hers, and for the first time in weeks, Oilia saw something other than exhaustion in his eyes. She saw hope. Dinner the next night was chaos. The twins argued over who got the last piece of garlic bread. Lila spilled her juice all over the table. Sienna and Katya talked over each other about a book they were both reading. And Marcus sat at the far end of the table, his arms folded, pointedly not looking at Dante. But he was there, and that was something. Dante sat beside Oilia, looking completely out of his element. He didn't know where to put his hands, didn't know when to speak. Looked like a man who had stepped into a foreign country without a map. But he was trying, and Oilia could see how much that cost him. Halfway through the meal, Lila turned to Dante with wide, curious eyes. "Are you Oilia's boyfriend?" she asked. The entire table went silent. Dante's face went carefully blank. Oilia choked on her water. "Lila," Sienna hissed, "you can't just ask that." "Why not?" Lila asked innocently. "Because it's rude," Katya said. "But I want to know." Everyone looked at Dante. He cleared his throat. "I'm a friend," Dante said carefully. Lila frowned. "But you hold her hand." "Lila," Oilia started, "and you look at her the way Prince Eric looks at Ariel in the movie." The twins started giggling. Marcus rolled his eyes, and Dante looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Oilia put her face in her hands, torn between mortification and laughter. "Okay," Oilia said, looking up. "New rule. No interrogating dinner guests. But no buts. Eat your vegetables." Lila pouted but went back to her plate. Under the table, Dante's hand found Oilia's. She glanced at him. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were softer than she'd ever seen them. After dinner, while the kids watched a movie in the living room, Oilia and Dante stood together in the kitchen washing dishes. It was domestic, normal, completely surreal. "I'm sorry about Lila," Oilia said quietly. "Don't be. She put you on the spot. She's 7. That's what 7-year-olds do. Oilia smiled slightly. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Dante spoke. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I don't look at you the way Prince Eric looks at Ariel. Oilia raised an eyebrow. No? No. How do you look at me? Dante set down the plate he was drying and turned to face her. Like you're the only thing in my life that makes sense, he said. Oilia's breath caught. Dante reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly gentle. I've spent my entire life building walls, he said quietly, keeping people at a distance, protecting myself by never letting anyone close enough to hurt me. His hand lingered against her cheek. And then you showed up. This shy, terrified secretary who apologized for existing. And somehow you walked right through every wall I'd ever built like they were made of paper. Oilia's eyes burned. I don't know what I'm doing, Dante admitted. I don't know how to be the person you deserve, but I know I don't want to lose you. Then don't, Oilia whispered. She rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, the kind of kiss that felt like a question. Dante answered by pulling her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist as he deepened the kiss with a desperation that made Oilia's knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Lila's going to be insufferable about this, Oilia whispered. Dante laughed, a real genuine laugh that transformed his entire face. Yeah, he agreed. She is. 6 months later, the house was full of life. Marcus started taking classes at community college. Sienna joined the school debate team. The twins made friends in the neighborhood. And Lila finally stopped having nightmares about warehouses and gunfire. Katya took the longest to settle, but eventually she started talking about becoming a social worker, someone who could help kids like her find their way out of impossible situations. Oilia went back to work, not for Dante, but at a nonprofit that helped homeless youth. It paid almost nothing, but every time she helped a scared teenager find a safe place to sleep, she thought of Ruth. And she knew she was doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. Dante was still in the life, still running his organization, still making choices Oilia didn't always agree with. But he came home every night, had dinner with the family, read bedtime stories to Lila with the same seriousness he used in business meetings. And slowly, Marcus started to soften, started to see Dante not just as the man who killed his brother, but as the man who protected his family when no one else would. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was acceptance. And sometimes that was enough. On a cold evening in March, exactly 1 year after Oilia had first left work at 317 to care for 6 hidden children, she stood in the backyard watching snow fall quietly over Chicago. Dante appeared beside her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. You're going to freeze, he said. I'm fine. You always say that. Oilia smiled and leaned against him. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the world into something clean and new. I never asked you, Dante said quietly. Why 317? Oilia had been waiting for this question. 16 years ago, at exactly 3:17 p.m., a woman named Ruth found me half frozen on a street corner. She saved my life, and ever since then I honored that moment every single day. Dante's arm tightened around her shoulders. And now? He asked. Oilia turned to face him, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. Now it's the moment I found you, she whispered. Dante's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them again, they were burning with emotion he didn't try to hide. I love you, he said. 3 words. Simple. Devastating. Oilia had never heard him say them before. I love you too, she whispered back. Dante kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning for years. And somewhere in the house behind them, 6 children who had been abandoned and broken and lost were safe and warm and loved, proving that even the most damaged souls could still build something beautiful out of the wreckage of their pasts. Proving that home wasn't a place. It was the people who refused to let you face the darkness alone. Proving that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone see you completely, scars and all, and trust them not to look away. Upstairs, Lila was already asleep, dreaming of a world where monsters couldn't reach her. Marcus was studying for midterms. headphones on, finally allowing himself to hope for a future beyond survival. And Oilia Thorne, the shy secretary who once made herself invisible just to stay alive, stood in the arms of the most dangerous man in Chicago and felt, for the first time in her entire life, completely safe. The snow kept falling, the city kept turning, and two broken people held on to each other in the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. Because that was what family did. And after everything they had survived, they had finally found home.